Good morning and welcome to NACD's Northern California Women's General Counsel and Director Forum that we do quarterly. Today's topic is on energy transition compliance from within the boardroom. And I have seen quite a few directors, very experienced people, and general counsels join. And just to note, we're particularly grateful that this community has expanded and continues to expand around the country. So we're really welcoming people from outside of California. So thank you for that. Allow me for a moment to introduce myself. I'm wearing a few hats today. My name's Catherine Zinn, and I'm the Chief Client Officer at Baker Botts. I have the moderator hat on today, and I'm really excited about that. I also serve as a director myself on for-profit and nonprofit company boards, and I'm also very grateful to serve on NACD's Leadership Council. So if for those of you who may not be familiar with Baker Botts, just a word, we are a global law firm with offices in Europe, Asia, Middle East, and of course, here in the US, we focus our business almost entirely in two sectors, energy and tech, split pretty equally between the two, and of course, increasingly in the intersection between those two areas. As many of you have heard me say before, as we've now done this cohort for well over a year now, what we've seen happen, and I should say what our goal is for today, for me, is really twofold. One is that we hope by here in California, 9 a.m., you will conclude the program with a hopefully new understanding that you heard something today that is helpful to you in your business. And for directors, it is perhaps it will change something or some way in which you view the board, your role in the boardroom, and what questions you may ask in the future. So that's, of course, number one. And by the way, if we didn't achieve those goals to your satisfaction, or you think they're topics and another way to get at things to be of value to you, please let us know that we're here to serve. The other thing that excites me about this particular day of the quarter is actually this message is for those of you who do not yet serve as directors on boards. I want to say today may be the day. It may be the day that you decide to finalize your board bio, that you decide to let people know that you're actively entertaining board seats. And I want you to know that this community of people is here to help you. And to help you learn about that role and how you go about getting that board seat. And I will say it is not my job, but is nonetheless a favorite hobby of mine to help place particularly women. I think I've become known for that on their really first board opportunity. So please send me your board bio on LinkedIn and let's engage and see what this community can do to support you. So with that, I am going to ask our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves as we delve into the topic of steering organizations toward a more sustainable future. So I'm going to start with Marie Huber, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Catherine. So great to be here. And lovely to see all of you. Speaking of GCs, I just retired from eBay as a chief legal officer, where I served for almost a decade. And before that, I was the chief legal officer at Agilent Technologies. I have served on public, private, and foundation boards. And I currently serve on the board of Portland General Electric, where I chair the Nominating Governance and Sustainability Committee. And to Catherine's point, I also share a passion for helping especially women and underrepresented groups from advancing in their careers and aspirations, whatever it may be, to become a GC or to join a board. So feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Julie, on to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Catherine, and thanks to NACD for having me this morning. It's great to be here with everyone. My name is Julie Mayo. I currently serve as Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer, as well as Chief Compliance Officer and Chief Risk Officer for Sempra Infrastructure. Sempra Infrastructure is part of the Sempra Energy family of companies. We are the infrastructure arm focused largely on LNG and midstream infrastructure in North America. We have a number of large capital intensive projects under construction right now and are heavily focused on the way the energy transition plays into some of our core businesses and fits in with Sempra Energy's broader strategy. I am a new Chief Legal Officer, having only joined Sempra Infrastructure in March of this year, after about 20 years in private practice in Big Law, most recently at Baker Botts. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Julie. You are in the thick of things as I think about you and your role, as is Katie Rowen. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here. Katie Rowen. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Vontier Corporation. So I lead legal, sustainability, communications, and human resources as well. So Vontier, you probably haven't heard of us. We're a global industrial technology company in the mobility space, right? So it's all about the movement of people, goods, data, and energy along the roadways. And so we're really providing hardware, software, and services to some key end markets, convenience retail, fueling stations, fleets, auto repair, and really important to highlight for this discussion, we play across the entire multi-energy landscape. So we're in everything from traditional petrol fueling to compressed natural gas, renewable natural gas, hydrogen, EV charging software, and again, that entire landscape. I also have the privilege and pleasure to sit on MIT's Climate and Sustainability Advisory Board, and also NACD's Center for Inclusive Governance board as well. So again, delighted to engage in the dialogue this morning.
It's so great, Katie. You have you really are making your mark, and we're grateful to you. So before we dive into the mud on all of this, I just want a housekeeping matter. As we go along, you are welcome to put questions into the chat as we go. We have held aside about 10 to 15 minutes before the conclusion of the program, where we would really focus most of our discussion, if you will. But feel free to pose questions as we go. So this is a rich topic, and one that we see directors really having a voracious appetite for. So there are a lot of programs going on like this one, and there will be more for good reason. So we're gonna, it's an ambitious agenda, talk about sustainability goals to navigate the increasingly complex regulatory landscape. We're gonna talk about something that I think has some tension, and tension doesn't need to be an unhealthy word, it can be quite healthy, around how does the interests of the shareholders align or not with those sustainability goals, and much more. So I am, Julie Mayo, going to go to you first. When we were planning for this program, interestingly, you were actually a few hours or a few days ahead of a significant board meeting where you would be spending quite a bit of time with the board on these related subjects. And I believe one of the critical areas of focus were the EU regulations and directives related to the globalization of the energy transition. And to the extent you can, I'm so interested in hearing just a high level summary of what was discussed. And also feel free to take us on a little tour of how you see the latest advancements in the energy transition landscape.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. So as anyone who has been in the very privileged, but at the same time, a little bit unenviable position of being the lawyer in the board meeting, who has to present on the regulatory change that is big and scary and perhaps by some perceived as either not interesting or not important. I think it's a really interesting challenge. And so for those who perhaps are not familiar, so the European Union has come out with really a standard setting directive on greenhouse gas mitigation. And this is going to apply to all natural gas that would be imported into the EU. So for example, exports of LNG from the United States to the EU are going to be required to comply with these directives. And they're really intended to be market setting. And they apply all the way back to the wellhead in terms of the types of information they're looking for. So, I was walking into a boardroom where there was, right, there's this perceived tension between creating partner and shareholder value and climate. Right. And so there's a view that those two are mutually exclusive and cannot coexist with some folks, right? Some folks have a very open idea that we can actually create shareholder value by being actively climate aware and active participants in the energy transition. But for those who may walk into a board where there's some convincing to do on that point, I think it really comes down to being very intentional about three different points. One is prioritization, two is goal setting, and three is implementation. So at Sempra Infrastructure, we talk a lot about what we call ruthless prioritization. The energy transition creates so many opportunities for businesses. And one of the overwhelming things that we've had at Sempra Infrastructure is more projects than we can really absorb from a capital commitment perspective, and more high quality partners looking to do those projects with us. And so one of the things that we've really had to focus on is how do we prioritize projects in the energy transition space that are consistent with our strategy, right? And so that really is something that helps the board members that we have to get on board, no pun intended, with the idea of moving forward with some of these projects in the energy transition space that are accretive to our core business and our core strategy and help us to achieve, and this will feed into the second point, which is goal setting, right? But will help us to achieve some of our goals associated with the production of lower carbon intensity LNG. And so we have to be intentional then when we set goals, because, and I know we have many lawyers in the room, but greenwashing is real and greenwashing is quite frightening. And so when we are setting goals, we have to be pragmatic about that. We have to be intentional about that. And we have to do that in a way that is, we can substantiate as being consistent with our strategy. And then you get to the third point, right? Which is you have to implement. And how do you actually implement the strategy and the goals, and showing the board, just to go back to the EU GHG example, showing that there's a way to comply and to be a leading global citizen in this space without sacrificing your strategy, without sacrificing your priorities, and without sacrificing shareholder value. And you can't prioritize as a company or as a board or as a management team unless you are well informed. So as boring as it may be to have the lawyer come in and talk to you about EU GHG mitigation directives, it's an important part of creating that trifecta for the board.
Sometimes the best things fall in the boring and important category, and I don't think it's boring. Julie, thank you. And thank you for outlining the prioritization, the goal setting, and the implementation. Marie, please comment generally on anything you'd like to add, of course, to what Julie outlined for us. And I, pardon me, happen to know that you have a very well informed view on the subject of this tension that I touched on in the opening remarks. And these are my words, not yours, that there may be a proclivity to be ambitious in goal setting, so much so that for a variety of reasons, the company finds themselves needing to walk back what they've said and maybe even unwind some things potentially. And so I'm very interested, and I know that our attendees are as well, in how you see companies addressing the goal settings and making, and this is a very hot topic, particularly for lawyers, making disclosures that are attainable and realistic. So there was a lot there. Take us through it.
Yes, and thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Julie, for your great remarks. So goal setting, I believe, needs to be driven and designed by the leadership team with alignment by the board. And if you look at what's going on in the world today, just so much coming at us, including especially if you're in the tech space, the increased load being driven by data centers and the big demand for generative AI, but it's everything else happening in the world that is screening for energy usage and needs, whether it's electrification, increased use of air conditioning, just a lot coming at companies. And so there can be, and you referred to this, Catherine, tension isn't necessarily a bad word. In fact, there's a lot of good natural tension because this is a very cross-functional decision relating to allocation of scarce resources, right? Regardless of what industry you're in, you're talking about how do you allocate the valuable capital of the company, its financial resources, its people, product, and tech resources. How do you partner with your various stakeholders, your business partners? How do you take into account the views of your customers, right? And I know we're going to get into talking about reputation later, your customers, your shareholders who could be on multiple parts of that spectrum in setting the goals, and your employees, right? So if you think about those three groups, customers, shareholders, employees, and then on top of that, you have the communities in which you live and work and your brand and reputation. So I think it's a very natural tension. And I want to just touch on three things. One is the content of that. The second is how, and then third on the disclosure. So as Julie referred to, and this is not boring, this is critical. There's an alphabet soup, especially in this world, of CBTI, GHGs, scope 1, 2, and 3. Like, even if your board members and your colleagues in the leadership team know your business in industry in and out, this can be like a foreign language to people. So just think about, like, you are in this privileged position to be helping to educate your colleagues, your peers, your boards on what is happening in this global regulatory, legal, but just the world view of what's happening there. And then how do you, and this is where your role as general counsels is so critical. How do you link that back to your core business strategy, your planning, your financial commitments? Then just a bit on the how, and we'll touch more on this later, is how do you help from the very unique seat that you're at where you can see across the enterprise. You work with the board, you work with the leadership team, you work across the org to help connect the dots on where do you bring that all together. And then speaking from the board level, a lot of different committees might think they own this. Sometimes NomGov sustainability might start with it from a policy and a sort of strategy perspective. But then I bet your audit committee chair and if you have a finance committee will say, hey, this ultimately comes down to financials, statements, commitments, and disclosure. So we need to own and be involved with that. And then finally, on disclosure, all of you on this call are probably far greater experts than I am on this, but just to touch on a few things. Disclosure is critical, right? If you look in the US, we've been on this roller coaster of climate disclosure rules coming out from the SEC. They've been challenged by the federal courts. And so without going down that rat hole, the takeaway there is even if you think courts are going to challenge the climate disclosure rules, you should still be prepared, either because your investors or your other stakeholders like employees, shareholders, or customers are going to demand it, to assume that some form of climate disclosure rules will be put in place where you'll have to talk about your targets, your greenhouse gas emissions, your scope 1, 2, and 3, and to also, from a very practical perspective, think about you have your formal SEC disclosure docs, but then you also have maybe what you consider your softer, like your sustainability reports. And are those 2 or 3 or 4 different reports consistent? Or because believe me, the regulators are going to be looking at what you're saying in your quarterly earnings calls, in your reports, in your formal SEC and other regulatory filings. So I'll just stop there and thank you.
It's hugely helpful to hear this discussed, and it is consistent, Marie, with what we hear in other forums similar to this. And it is evolving. And this group is a big part of how the future is shaped, which is among the things that you reminded us there. So Katie, you're a good person to take on. These are complex topics and considerations. And I want to pause for a moment and maybe just continue a theme of what Marie was discussing and help us understand who, in your view, should own sort of driving the decision-making around these subjects. And when we've spoken in the past, you used a title or a notion of a chief reputation stewards. And how you see this ownership playing out in companies. And by the way, congratulations to Vontier, because you see that you have been recognized in this way and that you lead with it. And it seems to be working for you. And if you would talk a little bit about the role of the board as well, and Marie touched on this, as to which board committees should have this oversight and sort of where does this notion of reputation reside?
Yeah. I mean, I think unpacking all of that, the chief reputation officer, or who owns reputation. I mean, I think one answer is everyone does, right? And I do believe that. I think the entire management team does. I think the board does. I think every employee does. You're only sort of as strong as your weakest link. And so how do you cultivate an environment where people feel that accountability and they want to sort of live that and show up that way day in and day out? But maybe touching on something sort of Marie said, the chief legal officer of today, I do think is in a really unique position when it comes to reputation, because we have so many seats at so many different tables, which affords us the opportunity to be able to connect dots and sense make in a way and see around corners that other executives on the team might not have the ability, not because they don't have the capability, but they're just not sitting, again, at as many tables. And so we're at the sustainability table, we're at the enterprise risk management table, I'm talking to investors. I'm in our M&A pipeline reviews. I'm talking to sell-side analysts. And so how do I kind of take all of those data points and again, sense make of those in a way that helps us think about, well, what should our narrative be? How do we generate value for all of our stakeholders? How do we make sure that the kind of narrative arc of the organization doesn't get ahead of the substantive arc, right? When we talk about sort of greenwashing. And I think that this is such a dynamic space too. So both when we talk about sustainability and the energy transition, we stood up as a public company just 4.5 years ago. And the landscape and how the sentiment has changed relative to both of those related topics is pretty incredible. So, 4 years ago, I wasn't hearing folks talk about kind of green hushing. Sustainability goals were not sort of linked with necessarily being sort of woke. Companies weren't being attacked frequently relative to that. I think from an energy transition standpoint, when we spun, a lot of the sentiment around Vontier as an investment, there's a big overhang on our stock when we spun because our portfolio was so tied to the internal combustion engine. And all anybody was talking about was electric vehicles and Tesla's, market cap and now you fast forward, 4 years later, and what we've been talking about, which is the energy trilemma and balancing sustainability with energy affordability and energy security and a multi-energy landscape, and why you're going to need different technologies for different modes of transportation. That's starting to be more of kind of the narrative externally. But how do you, again, as the person that's at the majority of those tables, how do you kind of connect those dots and create value and a message and a story that resonates for everybody? And then I think, part of your question was about, well, how do you, such a complex area, how do you, as a board, organize around it? We had our board sort of relook at this just a couple of years ago, and our board chairwoman, the chairs of our committees, our CEO sat down to talk about this very issue. Is there a better way to kind of manage ESG risks and opportunities and sustainability risks and opportunities? How do we think about that? And sort of, there's no right or wrong answer. There's a lot of different ways to cover the waterfront, and some companies have specific committees that are focused just on, sustainability. For us, where we landed and what fit for us, given kind of our board makeup, given our kind of operating model as an organization, was really, the whole board owns ESG risk and opportunity as a program and sustainability. But NomGov really taking ownership of reporting in this space, and also taking a coordinating role because there's so many overlapping topics at different committee levels. And so NomGov really taking, again, a kind of, traffic controller, coordinating leadership role relative to that. And certainly our audit committee, which kind of owns risk, including climate risk, that's a key partner there as well. So I'll pause and let other folks kind of jump in.
Katie, thank you so much. And I also just want to say I saw in the chat a little bit belatedly that the sound might have been challenging for some people, and I fear that I may have been the source of that not being muted. I hope that many of you are able to hear the important things that Katie had to say. And by the way, also looking at the chat, there are a lot of very thoughtful questions, and we could easily happily lock ourselves in a virtual room for a day and have a productive discussion, I am sure. I am going to follow our agenda, but we will leave time for addressing some of those questions shortly. So I would like to just ask briefly, Julie and Marie, other comments about how, and I like the phrase Katie used, is sort of, a lot of the phrases you use is sense make. That's my new favorite phrase, but also how we a board organizes itself around these subject matters and where this resides within committee structures, etc. Anything else either Julie, you or Marie would say about that?
Go ahead, Marie.
I think Katie said it well. I do think it does make sense to start in your NomGov, but every board and committee structure might be slightly different. And then just to make sure that you're looping in the appropriate committees. And sometimes what I've found has helped is if you sort of almost draw yourself a Venn diagram of committee members, and hopefully you have committee members who serve on sort of which committee members serve like on audit and NomGov, so they could be a point of connection for those committees. And then also, and I noticed in the chat there was a question about this, what's the best way to inform? Do you spend time in committee meetings? Once again, I think you need to gauge the appetite and the culture of your board and see what works best for them. And do people prefer pre-reads? Would they then prefer maybe even like a short little session one-on-one with people? And then when you have report outs by the committee, are you hitting on like just the very salient points or not? And so I don't think there's a one size fits all. And you also probably will find within your own board quite a disparity of maybe interest and knowledge on these topics. And it'll be up to you to kind of gauge that to help make sure everybody is at the appropriate level for your particular business strategy and needs.
Julie, before you jump in, Marie, I'm just reminded of a best practice that we often hear, because you just said people have a varying level of familiarity around the boardroom table. And as issues change, the needs change. And so the skills that may have been less relevant, skills and experience two years ago, are now very relevant and be important for other people around the table to know that. And therefore, I think there's sort of a general annual sort of skills assessment. There's of the directors, skills and experience is just a good practice. Julie?
Well, maybe just to piggyback on what you just said, Catherine, because I agree wholeheartedly with Marie with the idea that there's not a one size fits all, right? And it's really about communication and coordination and having that visibility. But I think part of it is creating an environment and a culture in the boardroom where it's okay to not know, right? And it's okay to have questions, and it's okay to have that intellectual curiosity. And sometimes it's a wonderful opportunity, I think, when things change under our feet, to be able to come in and, you know, and really talk about things and learn together a little bit. And so, you know, I think sometimes instead of thinking about it as, you know, oh, there are these new things, and as lawyers, right, we don't love new things. We think, oh, well, that's risky, and there's a lot of change, and I don't love any of that. We can think about that as an opportunity to level set, to get everyone on the same page, and then to create that environment, which I think can be really helpful in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely. And I'll be very interested in the new things. I think I don't know that it's new, but it's certainly front and center, is the question of time horizons, where I'm not an expert. When I think of goal setting and planning, how many of us have done the 3 to 5 year strategic plans in various types and ways? Well, it turns out when we talk about goal setting and time horizons as it relates to these broadly defined sustainability goals, of course, making sure that they align with business objectives, et cetera, that it's not 3 to 5 years. And that's not when we achieve carbon neutrality. That's not a surprise to anyone, but also heard this notion of, and intend to read more, Julie, in the It's Okay Not to Know introduced to me the concept recently. Sorry, all of you are probably familiar with the 7th generation principle, that we should be making decisions today that result in a sustainable future 7 generations from now, which in my head kind of, oh, it's too much, I can't handle it. But I'm very interested, all kidding aside, is the how companies are or should be addressing, I'll call it short, medium, and this, if you choose to talk about it, long potential for a longer term horizon. And I'm going to mute if Katie, you want to speak, because I was the person who messed up before.
Hopefully this will solve it. I hope so. Folks can, I'm looking at the chat now if we have echo issues again.
Julie, you might need to go on mute. I'm sorry, Katie, just in case.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think on the goal setting, I mean, I think again, you know, how do we back to sort of the having more data points than anybody, and how do we help try to see around corners? And when you're helping your team think about sort of goal setting, you know, are you and is the board asking like really probing questions to get at the critical thinking? You know, what would happen if 10 years from now our portfolio looked radically different than it does today? You know, what if we, you know, had a wildly different footprint across the globe? What if we weren't in the same regions we are in today? What if we shed this part of our business how would that affect kind of the thinking around goals? Being, you know, laser focused on your materiality assessments and what's really important to your stakeholders, your investors, your employees, prospective employees, and doing that materiality assessment with frequency, getting the touch points from your investors in this very dynamic space. I think that's really important. Making sure that, and this is kind of a not sexy topic, but I think the foundations here are really important. So, you know, is your data house in order, right? So do you have high fidelity data that's accurate and auditable, that you're using as your baseline to even try to think about what goal setting would be? And are you just goal setting, throwing a dart at the wall, or do you have a path to get there? Do you have experts that are helping you kind of think through what that might look like, especially in the outer years, and what's realistic for you as an organization? I think all of those things are really important. I think it's about good transparency, it's about materiality and prioritization, it's around rigor. And I will say this too, I think the goal is always to set targets and goals that don't change, where you're not having to walk that back. We've never done that, and I hope we never do that. But maybe it's controversial to say, I can imagine a universe where again, for your particular company, things have changed so much for whatever reason relative to your portfolio, your shareholder base, what have you, that maybe a goal that you set, you know, 5 or 10 years ago doesn't serve your stakeholder base anymore, and it's not generating the same amount of value, or it's not perceived as generating the same that amount of value. I think, you know, that could be a circumstance where it's really important to be the sort of courageous person in the room, that's raising what could be kind of a third rail topic about walking back a target. So, you know, never had to sort of cross that before, but you know, again, how do we sense make for the organization and raise our hand when others might not?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to rephrase this. I use the phrase walking back. I was one who introduced it, so I'm going to take it off the table. And instead, what I heard you say among many other things is, you can just recalibrate. You have new information coming in, and it's going to influence, of course, decision making. Julie, what's your thought on this?
I mean, I agree with Katie that I think fundamentally it's so important to be able to justify how you set the goal in the first place, right? Because we all understand and appreciate, and you know, I know we're talking a lot about energy transition and carbon neutrality today. When I think about how much things have changed just in 2024, right? And I think about things that impact, you know, any type of an infrastructure development business. You think about the death of Chevron deference. You know, the ground is always going to change, and so having a firm foundation for how you set the goal, and then having a lot of honesty and humility, I think, in addressing if and when you do need to readjust a goal. Because we talk a lot about, you know, is there is there kind of toxic optimism sometimes, right? It's great to be optimistic, but there is sometimes a fine line between being pragmatically optimistic and being toxically optimistic, where you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. And, you know, there have been examples in the market of companies that have set either net zero goals or some other kind of environmental or sustainability or climate change based goal. And I think there's a difference in terms of how companies set goals and how they readjusted those goals. And you can see that in the public and market perception of how those adjustments were made, right? And I don't think there's a one size fits all right way to do that. But I think being thoughtful in the goal setting, being pragmatic in the goal evaluation, and then being transparent in the goal readjustment, I think those things are critical no matter where you find yourself.
Interesting. And that toxic optimism, if it becomes infectious without asking rigorous questions along the way, could in and of itself become a risk to the organization.
Absolutely.
Marie, another thought on this?
Yes, I love that term, Julie. That's great. And I would say better to reset or recalibrate than to miss your commitments. And I would just add the whole concept of comparability to peers. So a lot of times your disclosures and investors will demand, how do you compare to your peers? So think about that. And so maybe you might see your peer group sort of shift. Maybe that will help you. And think about, I mean, you hear about sometimes the whole thing of the race to be second, right? Like, where are you in that group with your peers? So that could help if you need to think about recalibrating or resetting.
Good. I knew what this would happen. I feel better already. I was feeling overwhelmed by this subject, and I feel better, and I hope others do as well. So this will be my final question to the group before we address some of the questions in the chat, and we welcome, of course, the additional ones. So with this taking into consideration the longer term planning horizon, if you could comment, and you already have, but again, anything further to say on, do you believe that these sustainability goals can in fact, or they need not be in conflict with enhancing shareholder value? If Katie, no pressure. Do you want me to go to you first?
Yeah, happy to hit that. Just rephrase the question because your audio cut out for me, or just give it to me really quick.
My apologies. So address the tension that may exist between these setting long-term sustainability goals and still consistently enhancing shareholder value. Are they necessarily in conflict with one another?
Yeah, I think, look, our whole kind of North Star vision is accelerating smart, sustainable solutions. So we're very much focused on decarbonizing transportation. And so I think, you know, for us, I think we're in a good position to find sort of win-win-win solutions and again, be grounded in value generation for all of our stakeholders. I think for some companies that tension may be more robust earlier in the goal setting process, if that makes sense. I think everybody's going to find some tension points later on in the out years. But I think for us, so far in our kind of 5-year journey or so, we've been able to find those, I think, Julie, you were the one that said it's an opportunity-rich environment. It is if everyone is asking the right questions and prioritizing and focused on, again, that value generation. And so, how do we keep using that as our North Star, vision? And if we do that, I think we avoid a lot of those kind of trade-offs and tension points.
I think it's where strategy also becomes critical, right? Because making investments just to make investments right? When you think, I'm going to do this solely because I think it will be a great sustainability headline. That's the kind of thing that's not necessarily going to make everyone happy, all of your different stakeholders. And so this is why I think having a clear strategy and then looking for opportunities that really make sense, that are aligned with your strategy, and they're out there, right? Where you can be aligned with your strategy, you can be focused on the energy transition, for example, and you can be creating shareholder value at the same time. But if you don't have a strategy and you don't have a vision and you're taking kind of an ad hoc approach, and it goes back to kind of having a well-informed board, right? Having that intellectual curiosity, getting to the point where you can make thoughtful, informed decisions on all of these points is really important, particularly as Catherine has mentioned, and we've all talked about, as the ground is kind of shifting under your feet. And so I think that's critical in being able to remove that stigma that money and the climate are mutually exclusive. Because I think we've shown over and over again that doesn't have to be the case, but we have to be thoughtful about how we get there.
I am hopeful. I am not toxically optimistic. I am hopeful, Julie. Marie, final thought on this?
Yeah, I think it needs to be integrated into your business model, your plan, your strategy, and not siloed off, whether it's at the board level in a specific committee, but talked about across the enterprise and at all levels and with all stakeholders.
Thank you. Thank you for this. I am going to pause with the remaining time, and I would like us to address a couple of the questions in the and thoughts in the chat, which are just awesome. I also want to acknowledge and thank you for offering up resources that have been helpful to you. I know that Lisa is watching the chat with me, and we're going to disseminate some of the resources to you following the program, and we'll likely add some other nuggets along with that. I also see that there's a board member who's participating on a program who wanted some articles with, by the way, we're all in this together. One of our wonderful competitors, Weil, is doing that. And so I saw that as well. So I just want to acknowledge some of that's out there. The question I would like to go to is what is the best, and I hear this a lot, and so does NACD, what is the best path to educating the board around these issues? Do you find that you can take time during formal board meetings, or does it have to occur outside of meetings? Are your directors receptive to this and in-person presentations or written materials? And I can guess that some will say you need to know the culture and the customs of your board. Assuming that's the case, how would you address this?
I'll start. I would say, yes, you should address it with your board. And yes, you should take time, whether it's in board committee or board meetings, in a way that is integrated into what your industry, business, capital, financial resource needs are. And I think your directors will thank you for that, because this is such a complex, difficult, but exciting area. And I think people really want to learn and they want to know, but it's not something that is easy to do on your own. So they need experts like you to guide them through it.
That makes sense to me. Julie or Katie?
Yeah, I would just add a few things there. I mean, I think, and Marie, you said this sort of earlier on, the directors are all coming at this from a different level generally. And so how do you ensure, like, the time with the board is so finite and so precious, and there's so many worthy topics of us to be talking about all the time. And so I think the education, first of all, it's a dialogue with your board about what's going to be the most effective way to sort of educate them and bring them along. But I think it's always going to end up being a combination of different things. Some of it's going to be written to sort of get everybody to the same level relative to the regulatory landscape and other pieces. Some of it's going to be harnessing the experts that we work with. So like MIT, right? So we're bringing in MIT experts to talk to the board about the energy transition and the prognostications around that. We took the board to Norway this summer because the electric vehicle sort of market there and the penetration of EVs is like nowhere else in the world. So what a amazing place to bring the board to do field trips to customer site locations, to bring in customer experts and other experts to really do kind of a deep dive learning session in our area. So I think it's always got to be kind of a combo of learning mechanisms and avenues. And because it's such an opportunity-rich environment, at a high level, my bias is always like, how much of this can management do such a good job on the foundational pieces that we can reduce the amount of board time we're spending on risk topics because they have comfort with our data fidelity and some of those pieces, and we can elevate and really tap into their collective intelligence and their collective experiences on the opportunity side of the equation.
Absolutely. Julie?
I agree that it's kind of all of the things. And I too am a huge fan of the field trip. As an infrastructure company, so we regularly take our board to our sites, and there is no better way for someone to grasp the magnitude of what's going on in the energy transition space, or what is that piece of kit that we just spent so much money on, and showing people kind of this tangible, you can feel it, you can see it, you can put it into context. I think those types of experiences are so valuable, and I think they're the things that board members really do remember, because it's not just somebody gave me a written report or they told me, sitting in a conference room, this is the thing, but they've got that opportunity to see it in action. And I think that kind of visceral, touch it, feel it, see it, smell it is so critical. And it's my personal bias that I really think it helps buy-in. I think it is much harder to say, no, that's not a thing that we're going to support. It's not a thing that we want to do, after you've been on the ground, and you meet people, you meet all the folks that are working there in that space. And it just, I think that's, I think field trips are, at least in the infrastructure industry, really, really critical. So
it brings to life storytelling, which can be a very important part of carrying through themes of reputation and many things that Katie and all of you have touched on. By the way, I just want to thank Pam Martinson for her question earlier, Natalie Gibbons for just generally trying to be helpful to me. So thank you. And for some of your questions. And there's a related one from Gail Pollock. I think it's related. And this was about a third of the way through your remarks in this program, when there was discussion about the executive team should be doing the goal setting. And then do you intend that the board, this says board chair, but I'd like to broaden it, say the board should also be a part of that? Or is that what is the role of the board? And this is just an ongoing question that I have, and just sort of curious what your reactions are.
I'll start. I would say that it is the executive team's responsibility to be setting the goals, but I also think it depends upon where in the life cycle a company is. Like for maybe a younger, less mature company, it might depend upon the expertise and the skill set of the leadership team, whether you have a board that provides perhaps more guidance than otherwise. But if we're speaking generally, I think it's up to the leadership team to come up with a strategy, set the goals and targets, and then with consultation, and ultimately oversight from the board and input. And obviously, you want to draw on the expertise and the skills and experiences of your board members as well.
I think that's right. The only thing I would add is I think just the board can be so incredibly helpful here on just pressure testing. How well thought out are these goals? Are they grounded in value generation? Does the management team have a solid understanding of kind of investor sentiment around some of these topics? Are they rigorous? Are they science-based? And so I think that pressure testing and the board's ability to again kind of pool their collective experience and use some of that pattern recognition where to make sure that everything is sort of well-founded and grounded.
Which then gets you to the point of buy-in, right, at the board level, which you can't. I think it would be very difficult to be successful in achieving goals that were set by the management team that didn't have support at the board level. So I think all of that work that you just described, Katie, is what's leading you to get to the buy-in point.
Buy-in. I'm going to just let that hang out there as the final word as we come to close here. And a huge thank you to the group here, the wonderful engagement. If I could bring your attention to feedback. Up front, we asked you for ideas about programs, resources that are helpful to you. This is what we're here for. And specifically, there's a link that Danielle has provided where you can provide that in the chat, or I'm sure that Lisa and the team would welcome an email. Again, friendly reminder, welcome your board bio or any engagement with me. I just ask for your patience. So sometimes I can respond to you quickly with thoughts about opportunities for you. And it's also kind of a side hustle that I do for free, and I love it. But I'll just ask for your patience with that. But I welcome all the engagement of, tell me what your personal and professional goals are with respect to board service as they evolve. And just a few quick thoughts that I heard from today, and there were a lot of gems. Julie, I thank you for providing us with an outline that reminded us of the importance of having a steady hand while balanced with it's okay not to know. It really is. And you use the phrase intellectual curiosity, and that it's okay if you're a board member not to know. And I think we all know that the board members that are recognized for excellence are often the ones that are asking the best questions. So have at it. The number of phrases, Katie, that you brought to me today, and the way that you distill the essence of a very complex landscape is really outstanding and much appreciated. And I direct everybody to your LinkedIn profile because you are sending out so many valuable resources, both about the substantive areas that we've discussed today, as well as your leadership roles that you have with respect to NACD and to governance. And then Marie, I really appreciate you reminding this group that in fact you do get to see the whole horizon, that is a privilege to be in these roles. And I like to borrow, if you don't mind, from Billie Jean King, a book, Pressure is a Privilege. And I think there is some pressure on this group as chief legal officers, as directors, or you may serve as both.